Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about housing in this estimates debate. Housing was the gaping hole in the government's budget, and in the face of great expectation from the public that the government would use the budget to do something constructive about its housing crisis, very little was forthcoming. And I want to talk about that, sir, and start by drawing the House's attention to a story that ran in the New Zealand Herald on Saturday about a poll that the Herald had done of New Zealanders who own their own homes. Now, this is interesting, sir, because for a long time in this country it's been the conventional political wisdom that house prices going up is a good thing. And the idea, sir, has been always that when house prices go up, that means people are getting richer. They're acquiring extra value in that, sir. And for that reason, I think the governments for a long time have thought that it's fine to just let house prices go higher and higher. Well, something really interesting has happened, sir, in the last few years. And the Herald poll, sir, showed that half of those polled, half the homeowners that the Herald polled, said they were either worried or very worried by rising house prices. And that, I think, is remarkable, because these are people who, on the face of it, are benefiting from the fact that their house values are rising, but they told the Herald poll that they were very worried about this, sir. And I think this explains why housing has become such an explosive issue in the last few years. What the people told the Herald poll was that they were worried that their kids would never be able to own their own home, that they were locked out of the dream of home ownership. Right. And secondly, they were worried that the housing crisis and ever-escalating house prices could lead to a housing bust that would threaten the economy and could lead to people losing their shirts, as they did, sir, when the global financial crisis hit the United States. So I think that's very, very significant. It's clear to the people here, half of homeowners who told the Herald they were worried or extremely worried that we have a housing crisis. The symptoms are there for everybody to see. Let's look at what those symptoms are. We have rapidly falling rates of home ownership, sir. That was very clear from the census data that came out a few months ago. House prices in Auckland are skyrocketing. The median house price in Auckland is now over $700,000. And if you look at house price inflation in recent months, annualised, it amounts to house prices in Auckland going up by $72,000 every year. Is it any wonder that people cannot save fast enough to keep up with house price inflation? The Reserve Bank a year ago was so panicked by the housing crisis that they introduced these loan-to-value ratio lending restrictions that mean no matter where you are in the country, even if you're in Balclutha, Dunedin, Wanganui, Palmerston North, Gisborne, places where there is no housing crisis, you still have to find a 20% deposit, and that might be, depending on where you are, that could be $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 before you can even get in the door and talk to the bank manager about a mortgage. In Canterbury, because of this government's near-criminal negligence in failing to deliver a speedy residential rebuild in Canterbury after the earthquakes, rents have gone up by more than 40% in Canterbury since the earthquakes, and people are living in the most disgraceful living conditions because this government has taken a hands-off approach to the rebuild, and fewer than 1,000 of the 12 to 15,000 houses that are needed in Canterbury right now, fewer than 1,000 have actually been built. We've seen the running down of housing in New Zealand, 700 fewer state houses now than there were a year ago, more than 3,000 vacant state houses around the country, while people are shuffled off into the private rental market, living in often substandard conditions. So the OECD says we've got a housing crisis. They pointed out that we have some of the most overpriced housing in the world. The IMF said the same thing. The Reserve Bank noted the other day that the housing crisis in Auckland poses one of the biggest threats to our economy. But John Key and this national government are in denial about this. They don't believe there is a housing crisis. Well, The first step, sir, to addressing the problem is actually acknowledging that you have a problem, but National haven't even got to the first step. By contrast, Labor has a positive agenda for change. And if you look at our housing policy, sir, it's got so many bold, constructive elements to it. We are actually, the next Labor-led government will take serious measures to address the housing crisis. With Kiwi Build, we will build 10,000 affordable houses every year and sell them to first home buyers. What's National's solution? They are drawing lines on a map with their housing accords, hoping if they change the zoning rules, somehow the market is magically going to build these houses. Well, we can see that that's not happening, sir, because in Auckland, where they announced a housing accord more than a year ago, Nick Smith hasn't built a single new house in the special housing areas that anyone is living in. Labor will tackle the speculative forces that are driving house prices higher and higher in Auckland. We will do something about the demand side. A capital gains tax that excludes the family home will dampen down the out-of-control, frenzied speculative activity that the IMF report proved conclusively is responsible for driving up house prices in Auckland. National, on the other hand, refuses to do anything about the demand side. They won't even collect the facts on the effect of foreign offshore speculators outbidding New Zealand first home buyers and driving up house prices in Auckland. Even though the Reserve Bank says it would be helpful if the government collected the data, National refuses to do it. Well, Labor will change the law so that only New Zealand citizens and only New Zealand residents can buy houses in this country. There is no benefit to New Zealand of having offshore speculators buying houses in New Zealand and farming them for capital gain.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, Labor has policy that David Parker has put out there that will tackle monetary policy reform, that will lower interest rates, that will benefit both New Zealand home buyers and homeowners as well as New Zealand businesses. Labor will tackle the structural imbalances in our economy, the lack of savings, the lack of exports that mean that we haven't paid our way as a country for more than 40 years. We will tackle those are the very causes of the risk premium that means that foreign borrowers, when they're lending to New Zealand banks, charge extra. That's what explains the fact that New Zealanders are paying higher interest rates on their mortgages than homeowners in Australia, in the US and the UK. Sir, Labor will tackle the surge in inward migration and net inward migration that is going to mean that in the next year, David Bennett, in the next year, with a projected 42,000 extra migrants coming to New Zealand, that Auckland alone will have to build an extra 14,000 houses. Well, Mr. Bennett, do you know how many extra houses are being built in Auckland? About half that. We are only on track to build about half the number of houses that are needed to house the surge in inward migration that's happening under this government. John Key refuses to even acknowledge that that's an issue. That is negligent. But Labor will, sir, we will fine-tune the flow of skilled migration coming in here so that New Zealand gets the benefit of skilled migrants without putting unsustainable pressures on our housing market, sir. Labor, sir, will regulate, we will set minimum standards for rental properties to guarantee that every rental property in New Zealand is warm and dry. National refuses to do that. The most they can offer is this lame commitment by Nick Smith to carry out a pilot scheme of the warrant of fitness in state houses. It's not needed. State houses are already all insulated. What we need is action to set standards in the private rental sector to make sure that those 285,000 children that are growing up below the poverty line, largely living in private rental properties, at least have a warm, dry home to grow up in, sir, and Labor will guarantee that they get that. Instead of running down the state housing in the middle of a housing shortage, as National is doing. Labor will actually build state houses. We will increase them, sir. That is the obvious thing to do. National refuses to do it. Sir, we will solve the housing crisis. We've done it before. The first Labor government's massive program of state house building. In the 50s and 60s, successive governments intervened on the side of first home buyers and gave us the highest rates of home ownership in the world. We've done it before and we will do it again.
Order. The next call is a split call. Jackie Dean, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.